The airlock doors closed behind me with a heavy, echoing clang that vibrated through the metal bones of the station. For a long moment, no one moved. The corridor smelled of machine oil, recycled oxygen, and something faintly metallic, blood perhaps, though no one would ever admit it. Two silent servitors stood beside me, their pale augmetic eyes glowing softly in the red emergency lumens that washed the walls in dull crimson. Remember the feeling in my chest then, not fear, not yet, something colder, something heavier. In the Imperium of Man, a man expects death. Death is mercy, execution is honor, but exile is something else entirely. Exile means you no longer belong to humanity. My name had been erased from the records of Imperium of Man only moments before the airlock opened. Centuries of history erased with a single data purge command. I was once a humble archivist serving the Adeptus Administratum, a keeper of records so ancient that many of them were older than the cities that surrounded the cathedral spires of our world. My work had always been quiet, patient, obedient. I believed in the Emperor, we all did. His golden throne, far away on Terra, was the light that held back the madness of the galaxy, at least. That was what we were taught since childhood. But faith can become fragile when one reads too much. When records never meant to be seen. I remember the moment it happened. The data slate I accessed was buried beneath layers of clearance seals and encryption sigils belonging to the Inquisition. It had been misplaced in the archives for over a century. At first I believed it was simply another record of a lost colony or a forgotten military deployment. But the moment the file opened, my blood turned cold. The document described something impossible: entire Imperial worlds erased not by war, but by decree, planets declared spiritually contaminated and removed from star maps forever. Not destroyed, not invaded, just forgotten. The final line of the record was the worst part. Those who learn of this must not remain within the Emperor's domain. I remember sitting in silence for hours after reading it. The archive halls were enormous cathedrals of information, kilometers of data vaults and parchment, scrolls guarded by chanting servo skulls. But in that moment it felt like a tomb. The servitors beside me suddenly moved, their metal limbs worried, softly as they lifted my crate and carried it toward the docking chamber. My exile shuttle waited there, small, skeletal, barely more than an engine strapped to a coffin-shaped hull. The ship had no destination programmed, it did not need one. In exile, the galaxy itself becomes your prison. The overseer who accompanied the servitors was an old man with cybernetic lungs that hissed quietly each time he breathed. He did not look at me directly. No one ever does when delivering a sentence like mine. "You have been judged," he said in a monotone voice, reading from a small slate. "Your knowledge cannot remain within Imperial territory. Execution was considered but rejected. You will be removed from all systems recognized by the Imperium." His eyes finally met mine then, though they looked tired more than angry. "You will drift beyond the Astronomican, beyond the Emperor's light." That sentence struck harder than any weapon. The Astronomican is the psychic beacon that guides humanity's ships through the nightmare dimension known as the warp. Without it, navigation becomes impossible. Worlds beyond its reach are lost forever. To be sent there was not simply exile, it was abandonment by mankind itself. I wanted to ask him something then, not for mercy. Does not exist in the Imperium. I only wanted to know one thing. Those worlds in the archive, I said quietly. Why were they erased? The overseer paused. For a moment, I thought he might answer. Instead, he closed the slate and turned away. "Board the shuttle." That was all he said. The servitors pushed the crate inside the vessel. The hatch opened with a hiss of escaping air, revealing a narrow chamber containing a single seat, a small ration locker, and a viewport barely larger than my hand. I stepped inside slowly. The metal floor was cold beneath my boots. Somewhere inside the hull, the engines were already beginning to warm, producing a low mechanical hum that vibrated through the walls like the heartbeat of a dying machine. The hatch sealed behind me. Through the small viewport, I saw the overseer standing in the docking bay, his robe fluttering slightly in the artificial wind of the station's atmosphere vents. Then the launch clamps disengaged. The shuttle drifted backward into the void. For the first time in my life, I saw the stars without the safety of a world beneath my feet. The station grew smaller, its Gothic towers and cathedral domes shrinking into darkness. Soon, it was nothing more than a distant spark among thousands of others. And then, it vanished entirely. The ship's navigation system activated automatically, following the only instruction programmed into its machine. "Spirit, leave Imperial space." Hours passed in silence as the vessel accelerated through the cold emptiness between stars. I sat alone in the narrow chair, listening to the whisper of life support systems and the faint crackle of distant Vox signals fading further and further away. At some point, the glow of the Astronomican disappeared from the navigation display. When that light vanished, something inside me shifted. It felt like a door had closed behind my soul. Humanity was no longer behind me, only the void remained. Days passed, then weeks. The rations kept me alive, though barely. I spent most of the time staring through the viewport at the endless sea of stars, wondering if any of them belonged to those forgotten worlds mentioned in the archive. Worlds erased from history because something had gone wrong. Something terrible. It was during the 32nd day of exile that the first strange thing happened. I was half asleep when the ship's Vox receiver activated by itself. Static filled the cabin, harsh and distorted. At first I assumed it was simply interference from distant stellar radiation, but then the noise changed. Beneath the static, I heard something else. A voice. It was faint, broken, almost impossible to understand, but the words were unmistakable. You were not meant to survive. The message repeated over and over, echoing through the small cabin like a ghost whispering from another world. I checked the navigation display. Immediately, there were no nearby ships, no Imperial signals, no known star systems within thousands of kilometers. Yet the transmission continued. You were not meant to survive. I felt my hands trembling as I turned toward the viewport, and that was when I saw it. Far in the distance, barely visible against the darkness of space, there was a star that did not behave like any star I had ever seen. It pulsed slowly, breathing, like a living thing waiting for me to come closer. The message continued long after the first shock had faded from my body. At first it was only fragments, broken syllables buried beneath layers of static, like the voice of a man drowning somewhere deep within a storm of signals. The shuttle's Vox system had never been designed to receive transmissions this far beyond Imperial space. Out here, beyond the guiding light of the Astronomican communications, should have been impossible, yet the voice persisted, repeating the same chilling phrase with mechanical patience. You were not meant to survive. I sat frozen in the narrow pilot seat, staring at the flickering Vox display as the words echoed through the metal chamber like a ghost trapped inside the machine spirit of the vessel. At first I told myself it was a malfunction. Old ships often carried damaged cogitators, and the administratum was not known for providing exiles with reliable equipment. But deep inside, a darker thought had already begun to grow. Something out here knew I existed. Something that had been waiting. I turned my attention back toward the viewport, my breath fogging the glass as I leaned closer. The distant star I had noticed earlier was still there, pulsing slowly in the black ocean of space. But now that I studied it more carefully, I realized it was not behaving like a normal celestial body. Stars burn with violent, chaotic energy. Their light flickers and dances across the void. This one did something different. It pulsed with rhythm, a slow, deliberate heartbeat of pale crimson light that expanded outward before fading. Again, into darkness, I felt a chill crawl down my spine. The navigation cogitator confirmed what my eyes already suspected. There were no charted systems in that direction. The star was not listed in any Imperial database stored within the shuttle's memory banks. It was as though it had never existed. Yet there it was, glowing patiently in the distance like an eye-opening within the void. The Vox transmission crackled again. This time the voice sounded closer, more aware. You were not meant to survive. My hands tightened around the edge of the console as a wave of dread crept into my chest. In my years serving the Imperium of Man, I had studied countless reports describing strange phenomena beyond the Emperor's light. Warp distortions, ghost signals, entire ships lost to the madness of the warp. But those stories were always distant, abstract records on parchment or encrypted data slates, stored safely inside cathedral archives. Experiencing one yourself was something entirely different. I began scanning the shuttle's external sensors, though they were barely capable of detecting anything beyond a few thousand kilometers. The results made no sense. The star appeared to be much closer than I originally believed. Each pulse of its crimson glow was accompanied by a faint surge of radiation that brushed against the ship like distant waves touching a shoreline. Somehow, impossibly, the shuttle had been drifting toward it for days without my noticing. One immediately tried to alter course. The navigation console responded sluggishly as I input a new vector, instructing the engines to rotate the vessel away from the mysterious star. The thrusters fired with a dull rumble, pushing the shuttle sideways through the void. For a moment, relief washed through me. The star slowly shifted toward the edge of the viewport, but then the Vox receiver screamed to life again. Not a whisper this time, a shout. You were not meant to survive." The words exploded through the cabin so violently that I recoiled against the seat. The console lights flickered wildly, and the ship's machine spirit emitted a low mechanical groan as if protesting something unseen. Outside the viewport, the crimson star pulsed brighter than before. The radiation alarms began blinking one after another across the instrument panel, and then I noticed something that made my blood turn to ice. The star was getting larger. Not gradually, as a distant object would when approached over time. It was expanding rapidly, swelling outward like a living wound opening in the fabric of space. I checked the navigation display again in disbelief. According to the sensors, the shuttle had already changed direction. It was moving away exactly as commanded, yet the star continued to grow closer. The realization crept slowly into my mind, like a poisonous whisper. I was not approaching it, it was approaching me. My heart began pounding as I scrambled to activate every available thruster on the vessel. The small engines roared louder than before, burning precious fuel reserves as they attempted to push the shuttle into a full escape trajectory. But the star kept growing. Its crimson light now illuminated the cockpit, bathing the metal walls in a sickly red glow. That reminded me of the execution chambers beneath the Administratum archives. The Vox voice returned once more, though now it sounded almost amused. "You opened the archive." The sentence echoed through the cabin slowly, deliberately. "You saw what mankind was never meant to see." My throat felt dry as dust as I whispered back into the empty air. "What are you?" the Vox crackled. For a long moment, there was only static. Then the voice answered in a tone that felt ancient and impossibly distant. "We are what remains." At that exact moment, the star's light surged outward in a violent wave that blinded the sensors completely. The viewport filled with crimson fire as the object finally revealed its true shape. It was not a star, not even close. Suspended within the burning cloud of light was a structure so enormous that my mind struggled to comprehend its scale. A colossal sphere of black metal, covered in cathedral-like spires and jagged antennae stretching for thousands of kilometers. Its surface was scarred with ancient symbols that glowed faintly like dying embers. I had seen similar architecture before within Forbidden Inquisition records, describing ancient enemies of humanity. A single horrifying name surfaced in my thoughts, Necrons, but this structure was different from the tomb worlds described in Imperial reports. Those were silent planets where the metal dead slept beneath the surface. This thing was awake. Entire sections of the sphere were shifting slowly, massive plates of living metal unfolding like the petals of some impossible machine flower. Energy arcs crackled across its surface as enormous towers rotated toward the tiny shuttle drifting helplessly before it. The Vox voice whispered again, softer now. "The Imperium did not exile you." I felt a terrible understanding beginning to form inside my mind as I stared at the colossal construct filling the viewport. The archive record I had discovered, the erased planets, the forbidden knowledge. It had never been meant to remain hidden forever. Someone or something had needed a witness. "You were sent to us." The words echoed through the cabin just as the massive sphere began to open, revealing a dark aperture at its center large enough to swallow entire fleets, and my shuttle was drifting directly toward it. For several seconds I could not move. My body sat frozen in the pilot's chair while the impossible structure continued to unfold before me like a nightmare blooming in slow motion. The massive black sphere filled nearly the entire viewport now, its surface crawling with movement as enormous metallic plates shifted and folded outward. Towers the size of mountains rotated with precise mechanical purpose, each one glowing faintly with sickly green energy that pulsed through the metal veins of the structure. I had spent years studying ancient records within the Administratum archives of the Imperium of Man, reading fragments of forbidden history that described ancient enemies buried long before humanity first reached the stars. One name had appeared again and again in those sealed reports. Necrons, the undying machine legions who once ruled the galaxy before mankind even existed. But those records always described tomb worlds, silent planets where the metal dead slept beneath the surface, waiting for some distant era when their ancient dynasties would rise again. What I was looking at now was something far worse. This thing was not sleeping. It had been waiting. My shuttle drifted helplessly forward while the massive aperture at the center of the structure slowly widened. The opening resembled the mouth of some colossal mechanical beast, its interior lined with glowing pylons that hummed with deep resonant energy. The sound vibrated through the hull of my tiny vessel even across the vacuum of space, transmitted through unseen fields of power that wrapped around the craft like invisible chains. I tried the engines again, slamming my hand against the ignition rune in desperation. The thrusters responded with a weak roar, pushing the shuttle sideways for a moment before the invisible force pulled it back onto its original course. It was like trying to swim against a planetary gravity well. Whatever controlled this structure had already claimed my ship. Breathing became shallow as the Vox receiver crackled again, the same ancient voice whispering through layers of distortion. "Your species names us monsters." The words were calm, almost curious. "Your Imperium fears what it does not understand." My throat tightened as I forced myself to speak. "You erased those worlds." The silence that followed lasted several long seconds. Then the voice answered, "No." The single word echoed through the cabin like a stone. "Dropped into dark water, we did not erase them." A cold realization crept into my thoughts. If the Necrons had not destroyed those planets, then who had? The voice continued before I could ask. "Your Imperium did." I felt the air in the cockpit grow heavy, as though the ship itself rejected the meaning of those words. "Those systems discovered what lies beyond the light of the Astronomican," the voice explained slowly. "They learned that humanity is not alone in fearing the darkness." Images from the Forbidden Archive flooded back into my memory, entire star systems wiped from the maps, millions of Imperial citizens declared spiritually contaminated without explanation. The final line of the document returned to haunt me once more. "Those who learn of this must not remain within the Emperor's domain." My hands trembled against the console. "They erased them to hide you." The Vox speaker released a sound that almost resembled laughter, though it carried no warmth. "No. They erased them to hide the truth." At that moment the shuttle crossed the threshold of the enormous aperture. The stars vanished instantly, replaced by a cavern of metal so vast it felt like entering the hollow core of a dead planet. My senses went wild as unfamiliar energy signatures surrounded the craft from every direction. Towers of black alloy stretched into the darkness above and below, their surfaces covered in glowing symbols that pulsed in synchronized patterns like the heartbeat of some cosmic machine. The shuttle's engines shut down automatically as a field of green light enveloped the hull, guiding the vessel deeper into the structure. I felt like an insect being gently carried into the web of a patient predator. Yet strangely, no weapons fired, no mechanical soldiers appeared to destroy me. Instead, the ship descended slowly toward a circular platform illuminated by pale emerald light. The moment the landing struts touched the surface, the green field vanished. Silence filled the cockpit once again. For a long moment I simply sat there, staring through the viewport at the impossible architecture surrounding me. The scale of the chamber was beyond comprehension. Entire Imperial cities could have fit inside the hollow interior of this machine world. Slowly, the Vox activated one final time. "Leave the vessel." I hesitated. Every instinct inside my mind screamed that stepping outside would mean death. But another thought soon followed. If these beings had wanted me dead, they could have destroyed the shuttle hours ago. I unsealed the hatch with shaking hands. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a platform of polished black metal stretching out into a forest of towering structures and glowing pylons. The air beyond the hatch felt strangely cold and still. Somehow the interior of the structure maintained its own atmosphere. I stepped down carefully onto the alien surface. The metal beneath my boots hummed faintly with energy. As I looked around, a new movement caught my eye. From the shadows between the towering pylons, a tall figure emerged slowly. At first I thought it was another statue carved from black metal like the rest of the architecture, but then its eyes ignited with pale green light. The figure stood nearly twice my height, its skeletal body formed from polished living metal that reflected the chamber's eerie glow. Long limbs ended in clawed fingers, and a crown-like structure rose from its skull-shaped head. I knew instantly what I was looking at. Necron Lord, one of the ancient rulers of their undying dynasties. The machine being stopped several meters away from me, studying my fragile human body with silent curiosity. When it finally spoke, the voice did not come from the Vox receiver this time. It echoed directly inside my mind. "You have questions, Exile." My heart pounded as I forced myself to stand my ground before the towering metal entity. "Why bring me here?" The Necron Lord tilted its head slightly, the emerald glow in its eyes flickering like distant stars. "Because your Imperium believes we are their greatest enemy." It paused. Then the creature spoke the words that shattered everything I thought I knew about the galaxy. "But we are not the ones hunting humanity." Deep rumble suddenly shook the entire structure, vibrating through the platform beneath my feet. Far above us, somewhere beyond the towering pylons, an alarm-like resonance began echoing through the chamber. The Necron Lord slowly turned its glowing gaze toward the darkness overhead. When it looked back at me, its voice carried something I never expected to hear from an ancient machine. "Urgency. They have found you." The vibration that rolled through the structure felt like the distant tremor of a dying world. At first it was subtle, a low mechanical hum passing through the metal beneath my boots, but within seconds it grew stronger, spreading across the colossal chamber like a warning whispered through the bones of the machine itself. The towering pylons around us began to glow brighter, their emerald energy surging in violent pulses that painted the darkness with jagged waves of light. The Necron Lord remained perfectly still, its skeletal frame rigid as it stared upward into the vast hollow ceiling of the megastructure. I followed its gaze, though the darkness above was so deep that my human eyes could barely perceive anything beyond the distant glow of energy conduits. Somewhere high above, ancient machinery had awakened. Massive internal structures shifted slowly with the grinding sound of metal older than humanity itself. The Necron Lord finally spoke again, its voice resonating directly inside my mind with a calm that felt almost unsettling given the chaos unfolding around us. "They are close." My throat tightened as I forced out the question that had already begun forming in my thoughts. For a brief moment, the Necron Lord did not answer. Instead, it raised one long metallic arm toward the darkness above. At that exact moment the chamber lights dimmed, and an enormous projection of green energy unfolded in the air before us like a holographic window into space. I saw stars, and something moving between them. At first, I thought it was simply a cluster of asteroids drifting through the void, but then the shapes shifted, spreading outward like a swarm of living shadows devouring the light of distant suns. Thousands of bioorganic vessels, each one twisted and monstrous, drifting together like a single cosmic organism moving through the galaxy with silent purpose. My blood turned to ice as the terrible name surfaced in my mind, one I had seen many times in the sealed war reports of the Imperium of Man Tyranids. The swarm filled the projection like a living storm, endless tendrils of biological ships stretching across the darkness. I had studied records of Tyranid invasions before entire planets consumed by the monstrous hive fleets, every living thing devoured down to the smallest microbe. But those reports described individual fleets, separate tendrils of the great devouring swarm. What I was seeing now was something far larger, a concentration of bioships unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. "This is impossible," I whispered, my voice barely audible in the cavernous chamber. "The Imperium would know if a hive fleet this size entered the galaxy." The Necron Lord slowly turned its glowing gaze toward me again. "They do know." The answer came like a knife sliding quietly between my ribs. "But they cannot stop it." My mind struggled to understand what the projection was showing me. The swarm was moving along a specific path through the stars, its countless vessels converging toward a single distant region of space. A region that looked disturbingly familiar. The Necron Lord gestured again, and the projection zoomed closer toward the center of the Tyranid swarm's trajectory. Star systems appeared one by one, their coordinates highlighted in glowing glyphs that my mind somehow understood despite their alien design. My heart skipped as recognition struck me. These were the same systems listed in the Forbidden Archive I had discovered before my exile. The erased planets, the forgotten worlds. The Imperium discovered them centuries ago, the Necron Lord explained. Human colonies built on the edges of the galaxy, places where your species began to notice the shadows moving between the stars. The projection shifted again, revealing those same planets as they once were thriving. Imperial settlements orbiting distant suns, cities, shipyards, billions of human lives building new civilizations beyond the reach of terror. Then the image changed. Flames swallowed entire continents. Orbital bombardments turned oceans into boiling clouds of steam. The worlds burned one after another in a silent storm of annihilation. I felt my stomach twist as I realized what I was watching. "The Imperium destroyed them," I murmured. Necron Lord inclined its head slightly. "Yes." The answer echoed coldly in my thoughts. "Your Emperor's empire saw the swarm approaching long before your species was ready to face it." The projection shifted once more, showing the Tyranid swarm continuing its endless advance through the void. Those worlds were sacrifices, the machine being continued. A barrier of silence. Your Imperium erased them from history so panic would not spread among your people. My hands trembled as the truth settled into place. Billions of humans, erased not by alien invasion, but by their own empire. Destroyed simply to buy time. The Necron Lord took a slow step closer, its towering metallic form casting a long shadow across the platform. "But the swarm has grown," it said quietly. "Far beyond what your Imperium predicted." The projection suddenly expanded outward, revealing the full scale of the Tyranid presence lurking beyond the galaxy's edge. What I had first assumed was a single hive fleet was actually only the front edge of something far worse. The darkness beyond the stars moved like an ocean of living hunger stretching across unimaginable distances. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the truth. That's not a fleet. The Necron Lord's eyes glowed brighter. No, its answer came with terrible certainty. It is the beginning of the species. The implication crushed the air from my lungs. Humanity had been fighting only fragments of the Tyranid race, all this time small scouting tendrils sent ahead of the true swarm. What waited beyond the galaxy was something infinitely larger, something capable of devouring every star humanity had ever claimed. A sudden shockwave rippled through the chamber, far stronger than the earlier tremors. The entire structure groaned as ancient systems activated across its vast interior. Massive energy conduits flared to life along the walls, flooding the chamber with violent green light. The Necron Lord looked upward once more. The swarm has detected this structure. My pulse hammered in my ears. Then why bring me here? I asked desperately. Why show me any of this? For the first time since I had met the ancient machine ruler, something like emotion flickered in the glow of its eyes. Not anger, not hatred, something closer to cold calculation. Because your exile was not an accident. The word struck me like a thunderbolt. The Necron Lord raised one skeletal hand, and the projection shifted again, this time displaying the Imperial station where I had been sentenced to exile. Watched in stunned silence as robed figures from the secretive Order of the Inquisition appeared on the platform beside my shuttle just before its launch. They stood watching the vessel drift away into the void, waiting. The Inquisition knew you would find us, the Necron Lord explained calmly. Your discovery of the archive was not a mistake. My mind reeled as the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. I had never been exiled to silence me. I had been sent as a messenger, a human witness delivered into the hands of an ancient alien empire. The Necron Lord stepped closer until its towering metal form loomed over me like a living monument. Your Imperium fears the truth, it said, but the galaxy is changing. Another violent tremor shook the chamber as distant alarms echoed through the structure once again. The machine being turned toward the darkness above where the swarm slowly approached through the void. When it spoke again, the words felt heavier than any sentence I had heard in my life. Human exile. Your species has a choice to make. Its glowing eyes locked onto mine, and you are the one who must carry it back. For a long moment, I could not respond. The words of the Necron Lord echoed through my mind with a weight that felt impossible to carry. You must take the truth back. The idea alone was absurd. I was in exile, my name erased from the records of the Imperium of Man. My existence declared a threat to humanity itself. If I returned, the authorities would not listen. The Inquisition would silence me before I even finished my first sentence. Yet the Necron Lord watched me with patient stillness, its glowing emerald eyes reflecting the swirling projection of stars between us. Above the platform, the holographic image still displayed the slow, unstoppable movement of the Tyranids. Even now, the living swarm continued drifting through the darkness between galaxies, an ocean of hunger, gradually closing in on every star humanity had ever claimed. I swallowed hard as a cold realization crept into my thoughts. You're not asking me to warn them, I said quietly. The Necron Lord tilted its skeletal head slightly. No, the word carried no emotion. Your species already knows. A distant thunder rolled through the megastructure as ancient engines awakened somewhere far above the chamber. Massive pylons along the walls began channeling streams of green energy toward the central core of the structure, their light surging like rivers of fire beneath the black metal floor. The entire machine world was preparing for something. Then what do you want from me? I asked. The Necron Lord raised its long metallic hand again, and the holographic projection shifted. The Tyranid swarm vanished, replaced by an image of the Imperium's vast territories, stretching across the stars like scattered embers in an endless night. Thousands of worlds glowed faintly across the map. Humanity's empire, fragile, isolated, beautiful in its stubborn survival. Your Imperium believes it stands alone against the darkness, the Necron Lord said, slowly, but the galaxy has always been a battlefield older than your species. I watched as new symbols appeared across the map, ancient star systems marked with unfamiliar sigils belonging to civilizations long forgotten. Many of them were labeled with glyphs representing the Necron dynasties. Our kind once ruled this galaxy. The machine being continued. We defeated gods. We extinguished empires that existed before your sun first burned in the sky. Its voice carried neither pride nor arrogance, only cold certainty. But even we cannot stop the swarm alone. My chest tightened as I began to understand the terrifying implication of those words. You want an alliance, I whispered. The Necron Lord looked at me for several seconds before answering. We want survival. The holographic map shifted again, this time revealing the outer edges of the galaxy where the Tyranid swarm had begun its slow descent into the spiral arms. The swarm's tendrils stretched toward hundreds of star systems, like the grasping limbs of a monstrous creature reaching for prey. I felt the scale of it pressing down on my thoughts. Humanity had been fighting individual hive fleets for centuries, yet those battles were merely the first drops of rain before an endless storm. Another violent tremor shook the chamber, far stronger than before. Somewhere deep within the structure, a massive energy surge erupted, flooding the platform with blinding green light. The Necron Lord turned toward the darkness overhead. Once more, they have begun scanning this region, it said calmly. Soon they will find this structure. I stared up into the endless shadows of the chamber ceiling, imagining the Tyranid swarm drifting silently through space above us like a cosmic predator sensing prey. And when they do, the Necron Lord's glowing eyes narrowed slightly. Then we will awaken. At that moment, the floor beneath my feet shifted slightly as enormous mechanisms engaged across the machine world. I suddenly realized the terrifying truth. The structure I stood inside was not merely a fortress or research station, it was a tomb, a colossal resting place for an entire Necron dynasty waiting in silent slumber beneath layers of ancient metal. And it was beginning to wake. The Necron Lord stepped closer until its towering form loomed over me like a monument carved from living steel. Your Imperium believes exile is a punishment, it said quietly. But your leaders understand something your people do not. I looked up at the ancient machine ruler. What's that? The Necron Lord leaned down slightly, its voice lowering into a whisper that echoed inside my skull like distant thunder. Sometimes exile is the only way to send a message without starting a war. My breath caught in my throat as the meaning struck me. The Imperium had not merely exiled me because of what I learned. They had used my exile as a way to communicate with the Necrons without openly admitting it, a silent signal delivered through a disposable human life. Realization filled me with a strange mixture of anger and bitter understanding. Billions of lives erased to hide the truth. One insignificant archivist sent into the void to open negotiations with an ancient alien empire. I was not a prisoner, I was a letter. Another rumble echoed through the structure as massive energy cannons along the chamber walls began unfolding from hidden compartments in the metal. The entire megastructure was transforming into something far more dangerous, a weapon. The Necron Lord turned away from me and gazed toward the distant aperture where my tiny shuttle still rested on the landing platform. Your ship will be repaired, it said. You will return to your species. My heart pounded as I stared at the ancient machine. Returned. The word sounded unreal after so many days alone in the void. Yes, the Necron Lord looked back at me one final time. But when you arrived, the Imperium will pretend it never sent you. I felt a cold wave wash through my chest. Then why send me back at all? The Necron Lord paused for a long moment before answering. When it finally spoke, its voice carried a weight that felt heavier than the entire galaxy. Because the swarm is not your Imperium's greatest threat. My mind struggled to process that statement. If not the Tyranids, then what? The Necron Lord slowly raised its arm toward the darkness of the projection once more. The star map flickered, shifting away from the Tyranid swarm and focusing instead on the center of the galaxy itself. There, at the heart of the spiral arms, a terrible storm of crimson energy twisted through space like a wound in reality. I recognized it immediately from the forbidden text stored deep within the Administratum archives. The hellish dimension humanity feared above all others. The warp. The Necron Lord's voice echoed quietly through my mind. When the swarm arrives, the warp will respond. The projection zoomed closer toward the crimson storm until I saw shapes moving within the impossible currents of that dimension vast. Shifting silhouettes that seemed to watch the galaxy from behind the veil of reality. My skin turned cold as I realized something far worse than Tyranids had been waiting patiently within the warp all along. The Necron Lord spoke the final sentence with chilling calm. And when that happens, your Emperor's empire will discover what true extinction looks like. For a long moment after those words, the chamber fell into a silence so deep it felt like the galaxy itself had stopped breathing. The projection of the warp twisted slowly in the air before us, its crimson storms writhing like living wounds in the fabric of reality. I had read descriptions of the warp before. Every Imperial citizen is taught to fear it, but no record, no warning, no sacred sermon could truly prepare the human mind for the sight of it laid bare on such a scale. Vast currents of impossible energy spiraled through the projection like rivers of blood, and within those currents something moved. Not ships, not planets. Shapes that seemed alive in ways that defied any natural law the Imperium had ever documented. I felt my chest tighten as the realization settled like frost in my veins. Humanity had always believed the warp was simply another dimension, a dangerous one, yes, but still a natural part of the universe. But what the Necron Lord was showing me suggested something far worse, that the warp was not merely a place, it was a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. The towering machine ruler studied my reaction with cold patience, its emerald eyes reflecting the storm of crimson energy hovering between us. Your species believes the warp is chaos, it said quietly inside my mind. But chaos is merely a symptom. I swallowed hard. A symptom of what? The Necron Lord lifted one long skeletal finger toward the projection. The crimson storm shifted instantly, zooming deeper into the heart of the warp until the swirling currents parted like curtains drawn aside. What I saw next nearly caused my knees to buckle. Shapes, enormous shapes, drifting through the warp's impossible seas like shadows beneath dark water. Their forms were too large to comprehend fully, their outlines constantly changing as if reality itself struggled to define them. My mind tried to interpret them as creatures, but the scale was beyond anything biology could explain. These things were larger than star systems, larger than reason. My voice came out as a whisper. What are they? For the first time since I had met the ancient machine ruler, the Necron Lord hesitated before answering. They are the reason our kind once tried to silence the warp. The word struck me like a thunderbolt. I remembered fragments from sealed Imperial texts, ancient references to the Necrons building vast pylons across the galaxy to weaken warp activity. Those records had always been dismissed as myth or misunderstood relics from a forgotten war. But now I understood. The Necrons had not been trying to dominate the warp. They had been trying to cage it. Your Imperium believes the warp is the greatest threat to existence, the Necron Lord continued calmly. But what your species calls chaos is merely the surface. The projection trembled slightly as another violent shockwave rolled through the megastructure. Somewhere far above us, colossal defense systems were activating one after another. The Necron Lord ignored the disturbance, its glowing gaze fixed on the terrible shapes drifting through the warp. Those entities feed on emotion, fear, hatred, faith. I felt a chill crawl along my spine as the meaning became clear. Humanity's endless wars, its religious devotion to the Emperor, its constant suffering across a million worlds, all of it was fuel for something waiting beyond reality. The Necron Lord finally turned away from the projection and looked down at me again. When the Tyranids arrive in full force, the galaxy will burn. Its voice remained calm, but the weight of its words felt crushing. Billions will die. Entire civilizations will collapse in terror. My stomach twisted as I realized what that meant, and the warp will grow stronger. The Necron Lord inclined its head slightly. Yes. Another deep tremor shook the chamber as distant alarms echoed across the metal horizon of the megastructure. The Necron Lord finally turned toward the distant landing platform where my small exile shuttle waited in silence. Your Imperium believes it is preparing for war with the swarm, it said. But in truth, it is preparing a feast. The projection flickered one final time, revealing the galaxy again. Humanity's countless worlds burned like fragile sparks scattered across an endless night. Somewhere beyond those stars, the Tyranid swarm drifted closer with patient hunger. And beyond even that, the warp watched, waiting. I felt suddenly very small, standing in the shadow of the ancient machine ruler. Why show me this? I asked quietly. If the Imperium already knows, if they've known for centuries, then why does any of this matter? The Necron Lord looked down at me with something that almost resembled curiosity. Because knowledge changes behavior, its voice echoed through my mind like distant thunder. Your species believes it is fighting for survival, but survival is not enough. I frowned slightly. Then what? Is the Necron Lord turned toward the aperture of the structure where distant stars were just barely visible beyond the metal horizon. When it spoke again, its voice carried a strange gravity. Control. At that moment the chamber lights dimmed again as enormous gates along the platform walls began sliding open with thunderous mechanical force. From within those newly opened corridors emerged ranks of tall metallic warriors, hundreds of them marching in silent formation across the vast platform. Each skeletal figure carried glowing weapons, humming with lethal energy. I stared in stunned silence as the army assembled beneath the towering pylons. An entire Necron dynasty awakening from its ancient tomb. The Necron Lord raised its hand slightly, and the warriors halted instantly. The galaxy is entering a new age, it said. One where the old powers must decide whether to fight each other, or survive together. My heart pounded as I realized what that meant. The Necrons were preparing for war not against humanity, but against the swarm and the horrors beyond the warp. A war that could reshape the fate of the entire galaxy. The Necron Lord gestured toward my shuttle one last time. Return to your Imperium, exile. I hesitated. And tell them what? The ancient machine ruler's eyes glowed brighter as it answered with chilling certainty. Tell them the galaxy's oldest empire has awakened. It paused briefly before adding the final words. And this time, we will not sleep again.